Can you tell that Lent is over? Sweet relief. You would not believe what 40 days without hydration does to a guy. Okay, I'm good. I drank nothing but Fanta pineapple grapefruit since Ash Wednesday, and let me tell you, that toilet washer gets greener every time I'm done with this. I also gave up protein, brushing my teeth, sneezing, feeding my dogs, just unnecessary distractions. Why did I take Lent so seriously this year? Well, myself and Jesus have had a bit of a falling out lately. You get excommunicated from the church, forget his birthday one time, and suddenly you're the bad guy. Mrs. Brown's Boys keeps getting renewed, and I don't know about you, but I suspect he's pulling some strings up there specifically to piss me off. I'm trying my best to bring myself closer to Jesus this year, but I think the first step is to reflect on what went wrong along the way. So to celebrate Easter, I suppose we need to look back at the Catholic journey experienced by myself and millions of other Irish kids, and figure out when I started to drift apart from the big JC. When you're a primary school student in Ireland, your first Holy Communion feels like the grandest day of your entire life. Birthdays were always great, of course, but your communion is a once-in-a-lifetime occasion, and most Irish families will go out of their way to treat it with the utmost sanctity. Typically being held in May, it's the only other event in your life that carries the same gravity and dress code as your wedding. The girls wear white dresses with veils, while the lads rock up in their finest suits, and douse themselves with hair gel to really show that they give a shit. You're surrounded by photographers all day pulling this pose in every single photo for some reason. You'll either have a big gathering at your house or go out for a fancy meal, and you will be showered with attention, congratulations, and most importantly cash from everybody you've ever known. The first Holy Communion is a defining moment in the upbringing of any Irish Catholic. And have you noticed I didn't mention anything about the ceremony itself yet? The least important part of your first communion day. Your first communion. This is a ritual you go through when you're in second class of primary school, so you'll be around 8 years old. Up until that age, you've been watching with jealousy at Sunday Mass as the adults walk up the aisle and eat those communion wafers. One of the earliest cases of FOMO I can remember. But now you're ready to solidify your membership in the Catholic Church and fully embrace your faith in Christ our Lord. For the parents treating this as a big day out, the ceremony is just something you need to endure before you get to the good stuff. But for the stars on the altar, this is showtime after months of intense rehearsals. You'll have spent the entire school year getting ready for the occasion, as religion is so wildly entangled in the primary school curriculum. We all love making fun of Americans for having to stand up, put their hands on their hearts, look at the US flag, and recite the Pledge of Allegiance every single morning in school. But when you think about it, are we really in a position to talk? The amount of prayers we say in primary school is outlandish. Prayer in the morning, prayer before lunch, prayer after lunch, prayer before taking a piss, prayer before you go home. And in second class especially, praying becomes an extreme sport. In the lead up to your big day, you'll colour pictures with your name on it to hang up on the altar. You'll learn off all kinds of prayers, readings, and of course, some banging tunes from the 𝗕𝗒𝗻 soundtrack. As I mentioned in 2019, indoctrination was never so catchy until 𝗕𝗒𝗻 came along. Circle of Friends, Connected, God is a Woman, My Shepherd is the Lord. There is an endless supply of hits from these musical geniuses. 𝗕𝗒𝗻 was a key part of the curriculum in every year of school. But this guy right here is the 2012 Leo Messi of the bunch. It makes complete sense to pull out all the stops for the communion edition of the series, but I think the gap in quality is so drastic that every other iteration looks pathetic by comparison. Not even the confirmation edition holds a candle to it. Go ahead, tell me one thing you remember from 𝗕𝗒𝗻8. And don't say the sperm and egg on the back. Also, did anybody else have to do dance routines to the 𝗕𝗒𝗻 songs, or was that just my school? We already had enough readings and songs to study, but on top of all that, we literally had to stand there on the altar, the entire parish watching on, performing dumbass moves like this. And whenever I ask anybody from different schools, they have no memory of doing anything like that. The main event of the afternoon is when you cannibalize Jesus for the first time, and my god, this is the dog's bollocks. I remember my friends and I talking about the communion wafers afterwards, and agreeing that it tasted like cardboard. It definitely cured my FOMO, and those wafers never became any more appetizing. If you're lucky, your communion mass will be professionally recorded and sold on DVDs at your school. And trust me, these are hilarious to return to when you've grown up. Taking a look at mine, a lot of it is extremely boring, but seeing yourself and your friends with the high-pitched voices, stuttering through your readings, singing songs, it is top-class entertainment.
Please stand for the gospel acclamation.
Would you let this punk boss you around? I was so nervous about doing this reading in front of a packed church, but I absolutely killed it. I don't know why Christ is still holding a grudge against me. A few minutes later, the priest tells us that God is always watching us. Does that mean he's seen my videos? What would you think of this one? We're then told that the best gift we're receiving is Jesus. And I don't know about that one, man. The money was fairly class. I don't think there's a unifying Irish childhood memory that's more cherished than communion money. My communion was in April 2008. We were lucky to get in there right before the recession. And the money we received fully compensated for the time spent preparing in the classroom. Family, friends of my family, neighbors, people who I didn't know existed were giving me money that day. It was unreal. You could almost always count on seeing a €50 note when you opened up a card. 20s felt like a pittance. Any chance we got, everybody in my class was comparing how much money we had accumulated. It was the only thing we could focus on all day. When you're 8 years old, this is the most money you've ever possessed, and it's the most you'll possess for at least another 8 years. So it's hard to know what to do with it. And while receiving that money is a universally revered memory in Ireland, the aftermath is often a contentious one. I've heard so many horror stories of communion money being stored away by the parents in a credit union account, with the promise that it'll be kept safe, and it magically disappears by the time the child asks about it again. If you're a victim of this, I don't think a lawsuit is off the cards. Personally speaking, my memory is pretty spotty. I know I raked in over €800 that day, but I couldn't tell you what I did with the money. I have nothing from that era to show for it, and I can't comprehend how this little bastard could even begin to spend that kind of cash. I don't think my parents pulled the snaky move of taking it for themselves, so this is a question that still drives me insane. Where the hell's my money? I earned that. I can only imagine that kids these days are spending their earnings on V-Bucks and skibbity toilet merchandise, but in my time, the hottest products on the communion money market were the DS Lite and portable DVD players. Being able to watch the Simpsons movie on a little laptop during long car journeys, there was no better way to use your newfound wealth. I had both of these hot ticket items a few years later, but I'm fairly sure they were birthday and Christmas presents, so the communion money mystery remains unsolved. Amen. Right, I've said my prayer after a PKMX segment, and as you can see, I'm starting to get a bit desperate. I just hope the man upstairs can see that too. Yeah, we're definitely making progress, but I don't think I've done enough reflection to really make things right, so let's see if the cracks started to form after my confirmation. Taking place a few years after your first communion in March or April, your confirmation feels incredibly lackluster in comparison. The idea of this sacrament is that you're now recognized as an adult in the eyes of the church, and considering the crowd we're dealing with here, you do not want them to think of you as a child. The whole event is a bit redundant in retrospect, but the build-up at the time made it feel monumental. Bringing in the local bishop? You might as well be inviting the Pope. That signified to us that shit was getting real. The dress code is different this time round as well, as everybody has to cosplay as a bishop with red and white gowns. We looked fucking ridiculous. If you're gonna run a follow-up to an event as iconic as the First Communion, you'll need to give it a distinct gimmick to make it stand out. So how about the freedom to choose your own name? In addition to your first, middle and surname, now you can add a saint name to the lineup. While it's very much strictly a spiritual and not a legally binding affair, this is a massive decision as a kid that can leave you overwhelmed by choice. The opportunity to add some flair to your full name, thousands of saints to choose from, and I chose John. I don't know why I kept it so simple, but what I do remember is having to write a one-page essay about our saint, explaining why we chose their name and how they inspired us. I couldn't forget it if I tried. This was the most stressful thing I ever had to do in primary school. I imagine this assignment is fine if you choose somebody like St. Patrick, but how are you supposed to get a full page out of St. Alto of Altomunster? Another unique stipulation here is that you have to take a pledge, promising that you'll avoid cigarettes and alcohol until you turn 18. And you'll avoid drugs for life. If there's any type of written agreement that's more widely ignored than the terms and conditions of a website, this is the one right here. Unless you're a dry balls pussy like me. Yeah, you hear that, Jesus? I've avoided crack cocaine my entire life just to keep you happy. Yeah, I'm one of the rare few who genuinely honored this thing. I'm the most popular guy in town because of it. Aside from that drinking game I played one time, alcohol has simply never interested me. Smoking and drugs even less so. If Telly Bingo was ever taken off the air, I might give heroin a fair shot. But as it stands, I think I'll be upholding the pledge for life. To be honest, avoiding substances is my own personal choice and nothing to do with the church, but I'm trying to get back into Jesus's good books here, so please just go along with it. You also need to pick somebody to be your confirmation sponsor, and honestly, all I remember is that they put their hand on your shoulder at some point during mass. Aside from that, I couldn't tell you what their role in your life is supposed to be. Between the bishop gimmick, the fancy dress, the saint names and sponsors, the confirmation ceremony definitely puts in the work to form its own identity, but compared to communions, the hype's just not there. And unfortunately, this means that you're not going to make quite as much profit this time round. You'll probably do fairly well, don't get me wrong, but the money is another victim of the underwhelming sequel vibe that plagues the entire celebration. When I made my confirmation, the rule shared by many families was that this marked the point where you could finally get your own phone. So I bought this hunk of junk and my first laptop as well. I actually edited my Leaving Cert review video on this thing 6 years into its lifespan. It was basically choking to death by the time I exported it. Once again, filling up my wallet at that age was much appreciated, but reflecting on the day itself and the months spent preparing for it in school, yeah, that was a complete waste of time. You didn't think I was going to touch this topic without getting into a serious discussion about separation of church and state, now did you? It's a national conversation that happens this time every year, and it's one that I felt strongly about ever since I went through the whole rigmarole as a kid. But how many public figures out there are more qualified to give their take than the guy who talks about QuizZone on YouTube? As I've discussed several times already on this channel, the Catholic Church's control over the Irish state has weakened dramatically over the decades. Sure, religious programs are still prevalent in primary schools, but at least you don't have nuns beating the shit out of children anymore. In 2025, unless your parents come from a different religious background, chances are you're taking part in all these sacraments, saying prayers in school, being an altar server. When I was in school, it was just a given that you'd be raised as a Catholic and simply told that this is the religion you believe in. Maybe it was quietly allowed to opt your children out, but I don't recall any Catholic parents utilizing such an option. Growing up in the 2000s as opposed to the 1960s, for example, I can't exactly say I'm traumatized and that I was violently brainwashed into a dangerous cult. More so, it was just a boring inconvenience, and the time would have been better spent learning history or science. Why did I have to spend 3 years being an altar boy in service of a religion I didn't voluntarily sign up for? Our school had an altar server rota and everything. There is no reason why church duties should have been integrated with our education. And of course, while a lot of my thoughts are negative, there's also that little dash of fond nostalgia for the songs, the money, and the memories. I sound like I'm sitting on the fence here, but honestly, I just have mixed feelings. The way I see it, these two sentiments can coexist. One, I personally have no damning experiences with the church. My teachers were great, our local priest is an absolute gentleman, and while the religious aspect of school often felt like a slog, sometimes we had a lot of fun as well, and it never felt like it was being forcefully pushed on us. And two, that doesn't erase the fact that plenty of people do have horrific experiences to share, and because of everything they've done, the Catholic Church should never be heard from in Ireland again. If you can read into the crimes committed by this organisation and have an opinion that isn't "get these soulless parasites out of our country," I don't know what to tell you. I'm not saying to erase the Catholic faith from Ireland. I'm strictly talking about this satanic institution. If you're a believer, you have a direct connection to God with your prayers. You don't need a group of pedophiles serving as a middleman and acting like some moral authority over you. I actually have a lot of time for real Catholicism, and I feel like the religion is given a bad rep by the psychopaths who contort it into their own twisted, unrecognizable image. Also, you have to admit, the story of being executed, rising from the dead a few days later, and emerging from the tomb is pretty badass. I greatly admire the type of Christianity that simply preaches love thy neighbor and help those who are less fortunate. What I absolutely cannot stand is the type that turns people into raving, frothing at the mouth lunatics. The type that makes you treat LGBT people and immigrants as the enemy. The type that makes you lock up women and separate them from their children. The type that makes you cheer for the slaughter of innocent Palestinians on Holy Land. The type that makes you commit the most sickening acts of evil imaginable as if your white collar gives you a pass. It's already been said by many people smarter than me, but Jesus was a brown man man from the Middle East who preached about tolerance. There's no doubt that these fake Catholics would hate his guts if he did finally return to Earth. Luckily, it was the real Christianity we practice in school, with all the stupid bullshit filtered out. Of course, when I sneak into these ceremonies for my relatives now, I do find some of it a little weird and off-putting. It really threads that fine line of feeling like a cult, but then brings it back with the light-hearted songs I remember. But man, I'm not worthy that you should enter my home? That is insane glazing. Ireland is more secular than ever, and although communions and confirmations are still a massive annual tradition, how many parents do you think put their children through it because that's just what you do in Ireland, and it'll be a fun day out? If these sacraments were optional with preparation taking place entirely outside of school hours, I think you'd quickly filter out the real Jesus heads from the posers who aren't bothered about the religious aspect, and just see this as an inevitable rite of passage. Just like how Christmas is all about presents and food with zero spotlight on Jesus' birthday, communions are all about the pageantry of the occasion. It's a very small percentage of people getting hyped that their children are eating their first communion wafer. I think most parents are just planning how they'll spend the money they're about to rob from their kids. I'm no longer in that edgy phase where I say, have fun talking to the invisible man in the sky. I think faith is a wonderful thing when you don't add in the bigotry and evil that completely contradicts the teachings of Jesus of Nazareth. Simply believing that the people we love who have passed on are in a better place, being taken care of, that's good for the soul, and I hope it's true. What's absolutely corrosive to the soul is using religion as a vehicle to be a nasty prick. And to be fair, communions and confirmations never tried to lead us down that path. The ceremonies are fairly innocuous in modern day Ireland, and we no longer have abusive bastards shoving religion down kids' throats in a hostile manner. But there would be no harm in making more progress by removing all this from schools entirely, and letting the parents decide if they want their children to have a Catholic upbringing in their own time. Reflecting on my attitudes towards the church dating back to my younger years, I'm starting to see why Jesus had it out for me. But I've been putting in some serious effort to make amends with him, and it seems like he's picking up on that and is finally starting to go easy on me. So now it's time for the last judgment. Did I do enough for Lent to make him consider giving me the one thing I really want? If the answer is no, I'll put him back on that cross myself.
The beloved sitcom is officially returning for a 5th series.
What the f*** does he want from me?